Hello, everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of my interview with Jana Spangler. I'm John DeLynn. This is Mormon Stories Podcast. We are here for part 2 of my interview with Jana. We just spent 3 hours talking about her story, talking about her never feeling good enough in the Mormon church, plagued by perfectionism, then her massive faith crisis, how oddly progressive, marginal, alternative, unapproved Mormon podcasts and Sunstone and workshops and retreats actually helped her stay in the church, along with a supportive husband and a decently supportive ward and stake. And it was a great story, really inspiring. And we ended, with this discussion about how hard it can be to work on the margins within a religion like Mormonism, and with Jana basically saying she wants to and has been working to be a part of the solution on the margins. And so what we're going to do now is spend a couple hours talking about why someone might want to do this and how someone might approach what we're calling Contemplative Mormonism. We're gonna try out the branding of a new term. We're not going to call it progressive Mormonism. We're not going to call it liberal Mormonism. We're going to call today Contemplative Mormonism. But we're basically just going to pick Jana's brain and see if there's anyone out there who's wanting to stay in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They've had a faith crisis, or they're in a faith crisis, or they're long past a faith crisis. Maybe they've even left. And we're going to explore why someone might want to find a way to re-engage the LDS Church in 2021 as, let's just say, an unorthodox or a non-literal, or maybe even a progressive or whatever, Mormon, a different type of Mormon, unorthodox. So let me begin by kind of setting the stage. Thanks for being willing to do this, Jana. Mm-hmm. This is going to sound pretty intense. I thought about this when I was in the restroom. Let's just say that a lot of the people that are listening now are in the following place. Okay.
Okay.
They're either mad at God, or they don't even believe God might even be there. Or if there is a God, it's energy, but, unsure about God, if God's even there. Unsure about Jesus, if Jesus was even real. Jesus may have existed, but Jesus, at best, was kind of this wise dude who said some smart things. Who knows if there's a resurrection? Who knows if there's an afterlife? So God and Jesus are question marks at best. Or not. Or maybe they're like, I still believe in God, or I still believe in Jesus. And for everyone, it's like, okay, Joseph Smith did a lot of bad things. Book of Mormon probably wasn't a historical document. Maybe Joseph Smith fooled a lot of people. Certainly his polygamy and all that stuff was deeply problematic. Brigham Young was a racist. A lot of the Mormon scripture isn't what it claims to be. And then fast forward a couple hundred years, the church has this long history of being racist and sexist and homophobic and abusive and anti-intellectual. And in some sense, it's potentially bankrupt from a truth claims perspective. Some would say it's morally bankrupt. Some would say it's bankrupt from a social justice standpoint. Some would say it's just harmful. And so, like, they would just say, I can't believe any of that anymore. I can't believe pretty much any of the orthodox tenets or pillars of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Certainly don't believe it's God's one true church. So why in the world would I even want to give it a chance? Why would I even want to contemplate rebuilding a spiritual life within it? Too fraught, too problematic, not true. So let's, I know I don't mean to like front load it in not such a heavy way, but honestly, there's a lot of people who get there.
Sure.
You got there.
Yeah.
And so it's worth asking, like, why should someone even start to consider that path? And I know you're going to say it's not a path for everyone.
It is not a path for everyone. Yeah. But why would they even think about it? Yeah, I get it. I would say that should not be their first question. It shouldn't be the question they're asking. I would say there's a different question that we should be asking, which is, first of all, I would say wherever you are on that spectrum of belief in God and no belief in God, Jesus in, out, wherever you are with truth claims, wherever you are exactly where you need to be. You're exactly where your life has brought you. And I don't think that we help people by going in with an agenda of changing them. What I do think we do to help people is to help them imagine the possibilities. And then when they've had a chance to gain their own confidence, their own compass, their own sense of reality of how to even know what we know, then start to explore what inspires you. That may or may not lead you back to the church, but it will lead you somewhere good. So I never come from a place of, hey, you've had this experience with the church. I think what we really need to is get you back into the church, or I really need you to start opening your mind to coming back to the church. I think that is a corollary that will come if that is the right decision for you. It's not like they don't know the church is there. It's not like they don't know the goodness. Sometimes it's really hard to acknowledge the goodness. I've been there. There's a lot about the church that's still good that I still have a hard time saying is good. There's a lot of emotion that goes along with a faith transition. And it makes it very hard for us to see what is good in the church for a very long time. I think that's appropriate also. So I don't know. I would not say I would ever say this is why you need to give the church a second shot. I would say this is why you need to give spirituality a second shot, and let's see where that takes you.
Okay. So the first thing I hear you saying is be open to spirituality. Now, even that concept is triggering for a lot of people. Hugely. Yeah, they're like, spirit, wait, that means there's some metaphysical realm. Right. That means there's spirits in our body. Right. That takes me to the pre-existence and Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother. And they just go spiritual. No, I don't. That's 100%. Triggering. That's too triggering. 100%. Because Western Christianity has hijacked spirituality into religiosity. We have conflated those two terms I ask this so often when clients come to see me. So what is your view of a spiritual person? Like when you were Orthodox in the church and you said, that person in my word is super spiritual, what would you say? And every one of them involves some sort of acknowledgement of obedience, doing the things really well, doing the callings. It has a lot of doing in it. And there's not a lot of being in it. And I think what we have done is we have set up this religious structure, and we can't see the forest for the trees sometimes. So we imagine that God is what we were taught in whatever religion we came up in. This is who God is. Once my heart is telling me that's not right, very often we don't know that there's any other choice, but there's not a God. I can't believe in that God, so there's no God, right? For me, spirituality does not connote any of those things. This is why I say that there's a great book out there called The Spiritual Atheist.
Because to me, spirituality is just where our internal lives connect with existence. So to me, spirituality is just what inspires me, what makes me want to be a better person, what makes me want to connect with the world and with something that's beyond myself. That seems to be really highly correlated with wellness and fulfillment in life in studies that I've read. So I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing to pay attention to our inner lives. It's a good thing to pay attention to the ways that we interact with the world and what am I bringing to the world and what unconscious things are going on inside of me that is making me bring something to the world that, you know, is good or is bad or whatever, and is always a mix of somewhere of both, right? So to me, spirituality is much more of an interpersonal journey of how we make meaning of our lives and how we find our place in this world. And everyone's got that. I don't care where you are in the spectrum of belief. We have hijacked faith to mean belief, and we do it so well in the church.
What's the difference between faith and belief?
So I think faith can encompass belief, but I don't think it is everything. Being raised in the church, I mean, we talk about testimony and we talk about the things we know. I mean, that's the phrase we hear more than any other. And in any given testimony meeting is I know, right? We have this idea that there's one way to do a faith journey, and that is to become more and more and more convinced. This is why doubt is looked at as anathema to faith. We can't quite conceive of how doubt can actually enliven faith because we think of it as belief. Belief it's really hard to hold belief in doubt. That is hard to do. But faith is much more of a relationship word. The word pistis and I'm butchering that, I'm sure. I don't speak Greek, but the Greek word pistis, P-I-S-T-I-S, was translated into the New Testament as faith most often. And that word in the Greek means a whole lot more than belief. It encompasses belief, but it's also a relationship. It's a trust. It's a hope. It's being trustworthy. It's, so I see faith as the ability to move forward when I have absolutely no clue what is going on in the universe. Like, I have faith in a benevolent universe. I have faith that if I continue to do good things and those things that I have put back in my truth basket, which I will tell you is not a lot of things, but I have, love is there, service is there, I'm getting outside myself while also caring for myself. Those things are in my truth basket. And I have faith that if I do those things, that I will be able to build a meaningful life that I will want to show up for. That's the difference between belief and faith. And it's not contingent on what I believe. Now, the things I believe can aid that, can give structure to that, can give some meaning to that. But that's not what faith is. That's not what spirituality is to me anymore.
Okay, so you're blowing my Mormon mind. I've got my Mormon hat on for a second. I'm putting back on my Orthodox Mormon hat.
Yeah.
Thinking, okay. So in terms of belief, did I hear you say your beliefs have gotten smaller and smaller and fewer over time? They're
far less rigid over time, and it's not the focus of my faith.
Beliefs are less important.
Less important, for sure.
So if you were to list 5 of your most important beliefs, what are they?
I mean, honestly, it's kind of what I just said. So
I didn't hear God. I didn't hear Jesus. I didn't hear Atonement. I didn't hear Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
I didn't hear Book of Mormon.
Correct.
Why?
Because I still don't know what to think about all those things. When I look at the Book of Mormon, it's not that I'm ignoring the truth claims, or because I think those are super important. I still listen to lots of Mormon Stories podcasts that are good. I listen to the Robert Rittner thing. I listen to things. I care about the scholarship. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's really, really interesting. But it is not a decision factor in what I do with my connection to the church. So when I look at the Book of Mormon, I think there is a lot of scholarship that has come out that is indicating that this is a 19th century document. Faithful historians are saying this these days. This is not just me going out in a weird place for this, right? I'm fine with people. People are going to make sense of it the way that they make sense of it. So I'm fine with people believing what they believe about it. For me, I think, yeah, there's a lot there that indicates to me it's a 19th century document. But what's important to me is what's in it, what's in the pages. What do I feel when I read it? Is there God's inspiration in that book? Sure. There are also problems. I mean, there are problems in there that prior to my faith crisis, I would have been defending. I would have been defending the racism. I would have tried to minimize it or, make it not be a thing. I don't do that anymore. There's racism in there. It's clear. But I have different frames for looking at that, of why that would be. I'm more and more and more comfortable with the imperfection that is life. And I don't need the church to be perfect. I don't need the Book of Mormon to be perfect. I don't need prophets to be perfect. I don't need myself to be perfect. This is kind of a mantra that kind of guides me, right? And it's helping me in all kinds of areas of my life to be looking at it that way. So, but I say these things, and I don't want to skip over the fact that I was super bugged by these things, you know, along the way. Yeah.
And I don't want to spend too much time here because I've done that with 1,000 other people, literally. But just to kind of really put a fine point on it. So like, my guess is if I were to say to you, what about the afterlife? You would probably say what? You'd say,
I have hopes for it. I have hopes for it. I don't particularly resonate with the Mormon story of it, especially women's roles in it. I don't like the idea of emulating Heavenly Mother the way that she's been placed in the church. I don't even know how I feel about an anthropomorphic God. At times that has been super helpful for me and continues to be super helpful for me to think of God as anthropomorphized and as both male and female and anything in between. And I don't need it to be that. So I'm super open to whatever life brings me through all of the ways that we discern new ideas in life. I'm super open to science. I'm super open to psychology. I'm super open to new studies. I'm really open to spiritual inspiration from wherever that comes, recognizing that we all have our biases, we all have our cultural whatever, and we are all looking through a glass darkly. And I don't think that changes when you take on the role of a prophet.
There's this term anti-Mormon that, you know, a lot of us take umbrage with. We hate that term because it feels like a slur or, you know, something to denigrate, a pejorative or whatever. But in some sense, the frame you've already laid out feels very anti-Mormon to me. And let me tell you what I mean by that. It's meaning not Mormon. Right? Meaning the opposite of what I associate with Mormonism. Because the Mormonism, and I'm sure I was set up for this, the Mormonism I was raised in, it's like the apostasy happened and Jesus lived, but then the church fell in apostasy. And then Joseph was called and he saw God, and he was called the one true church, and the golden plates and angels and Lamanites and priesthood and patriarchal blessing and temple marriage and heaven and the 3 degrees and Jesus and then the resurrection and the judgment and temples and ordinances and just prophets, everything. That's Mormonism.
And that is certainly how we have held it in the late 20th century and early 21st century. 100%.
Yeah. And you know, if I'm just getting to the point of it all, of what we said so far, you're basically saying, like that's where we've been. That's a way to be Mormon.
Yep.
And what I'm hearing is like, none of that stuff that I mentioned is like central to, none of that stuff is like central to what you're talking about. You're almost playing a totally different game. There's a football field and we know what the goalposts are, and we know what the markers are, and we know, but it's like you're playing a totally different game in the field that we have associated with all those other things that I just mentioned, but all those other things aren't really central to your game.
So I would say that is true and not true at the same time. So it's really hard to talk about this. I mean, I was just noticing, John, when you bring up God, for instance, like I was watching, I was binge watching some Cosmos over the Christmas break. And I remember, you know, love me some Neil deGrasse Tyson. He's great. And I'm watching this thinking, yeah, there are really good explanations for pretty much everything scientifically, right? Like this makes a lot of sense. It's miraculous. It's amazing. I'm just dumbfounded at all of creation. And then at the very end of it, I'm also thinking, but why is there something rather than nothing? I still come back to that. Like, why is there something rather than nothing? Why does anything exist? So I find myself at times being more and more convinced that there's no God and that there is totally a God in the same moment, in the same day. It depends on the day and how I'm feeling about that thing at the time. Like I think about 2 years ago, my son had a life-threatening illness and had a couple of dicey moments up at the hospital. One in particular where the respiratory team and the resuscitation team and the PICU team were all huddling around my son as they're dashing us off to a CAT scan. And in that moment, I reverted right back to Mormon heavenly mother and father. I was right there with it, and I was praying directly to that, and it was so useful for me. In that moment, that was everything. And then a few days later, my feeling changes. So this is why I say, like, all of my doubts and all of my not knowing are such a catalyst to help me deepen into the wonder of what all of this is. And in all of that, I have felt more spirituality, more closeness to God, more resonance with the teachings of Jesus, more resonance with parts of the Book of Mormon, more resonance with things that some of the prophets and apostles have said, more resonance than I ever have before. So it is both very important and not at all important to me, if that makes sense, which it probably doesn't. But
No. As I think about the 3 hours we just spent with you, it's just like 4 decades of feeling unworthy and inadequate, and you're not getting the answers, and you're feeling like you're in the desert and you're thirsting and you're never finding the answer.
Yeah.
And the church is like, Mormonism is fundamentally just not giving you sustenance.
Yeah.
Then you have this massive faith crisis.
Yes.
It all falls apart.
Yes.
You get exposed to all these dangerous people. And you had to lose your faith to then have it's not like you had to have your heart cracked open to then have the capacity to draw spiritual sustenance from within a Mormon framework. And that's so ironic.
Yes.
And it's in such a non-Mormon way.
Yes.
Like it's a real paradox.
It is.
But you found it. See, that's the thing. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Jana, for 4 decades, you're like struggling. And now I see power and I see light.
Yeah.
And I'm like, as I'm just thinking about your story, I'm thinking, I'm so happy Jana has finally found like confidence and light and comfort and strength and confidence. That's so good. I'm so happy.
No, and honestly, John, thank you for saying that. And it feels that way to me. Like I had a narrative of myself that I was not spiritual, that I was not a spiritual person. You did a Mormon story years ago with Danny and Mira Kofed. And I resonated with her so much when I listened to that, because one piece of her story just really stood out to me when she had a similar experience of feeling like she was not spiritual. And she was, as she was going through faith transition, she came in contact with someone, and I don't remember who it was, some sort of a healer who saw the spirituality that was deep inside her. And I remember that gave me the strength to say, I wonder if I've just been defining this wrong my whole life. That because I was just a piano person and my husband had all the leadership callings, maybe that doesn't define me as far as my spirituality. Maybe I've just been using the wrong measuring stick. And honestly, since I've given myself that permission, I feel like my spiritual life has just blown up on me. And I feel closer to whatever God might be. And I choose to say, that's God. I choose to name that, whatever it is I'm experiencing, God. I feel closer to that and more loved and more confident and more able to help other people, more able to see other people than ever before. Even my husband, who definitely sees church in a very different way, he has to admit, he's said it to me more than once, that you're a better person now than you used to be. So how can I argue with that, right? Like, it can feel threatening. He has those, what about our eternal marriage? What about all of this? What does this mean for us, that you're not affirming everything exactly the way you did? But he's like, you're a better person. I have to admit it.
Yeah. So one of the common criticisms, and I'm going to just tell my ex-Mormon, post-Mormon friends, don't be mean, don't be rude to Jana. I love Jana and she's awesome. One of the comments they'll make is, well, this isn't Mormonism.
For sure.
What you're talking about is not Mormonism. Yeah. None of it's Mormonism.
Yeah. So I would say, again, it's not the Mormonism of the late 20th century and the early 21st century. I do think there are roots there in some of this. We've left the most fun stuff out of correlation. I'll just say that. Like, we were spoon-fed specific quotes, specific things that went on in the early church. And I don't pretend to be any kind of expert or historian, but I do take it in. I take it in and it sticks with me. It's my interest. It's what I love. But what resonates for me now it's a different kind of a Joseph Smith that I'm seeing. Way more problematic than I ever thought before, right? That also, there's this piece of him where I see things he's written about not wanting Mormonism to be about creeds, not wanting it to be about, wanting to be able to think for himself, not wanting to be trammeled. Like, this is in the history of the church if you go read it.
Joseph Smith had this very, like, wherever truth is, bring it.
We're going to bring it.
It's Mormon.
It's
truth, it's Mormon.
I never heard him say, all truth will come through me because I am the prophet of the restoration. Yeah. And so you need to be fearful of all of that. And even Brigham Young, in all of his problems, said, wherever it is, if the heathen has the truth, we bring it in. That's what Mormonism is. We're just going to collect the truth wherever it is. They never imagined that they were delivering some neat little package. You know, the Joseph Smith that I have learned, not in correlation, the one I've learned about was one that was continually seeking who he thought God was when he was, at the time as a teenager, having whatever the first vision was, right? Was very different than the God that he was talking about before he died later in his life. It was unfolding to him. He was changing his mind all the time. It was not a monolith. we have taken some of this, and in my view, we've cemented things that were never meant to be cemented. I think Joseph was on a path of discovery, and I don't think that discovery was done when he died. And I think a lot of the people who came after him did not recognize that that's what this is a discovery process, and that maybe we don't have it all figured out. Joseph, to me, seemed like he was always willing to take in a new thing. So in some ways, I feel like I'm super Mormon. I'm really Mormon. I mean, the paradox, one of my favorite Joseph Smith quotes is, by proving opposites is truth made manifest. You know, there's a quote, the thy mind, O man quote, and I can't quote it perfectly, but he talks about if you're going to bring a man to salvation, he has to contemplate the highest high and the darkest abyss. Like you've got to take it all in. You cannot be afraid of reality, because reality is wonderful and terrible and awful. So yeah, am I a Bruce R. McConkie Mormon? No, I am not. But I think there are pieces of the restoration from early on that really resonate with me, that I think I'm actually quite Mormon.
Well, since you brought up Joseph Smith, just really quickly,
yeah.
since a modern understanding of the Book of Mormon and the Book of Abraham is that they likely aren't what we were told they were.
Yeah.
Some people who go through this end up saying, well, then it must have been a fraud. It must have been Joseph fooling people and deceiving people.
Right.
Therefore, like, I have to reject them as scripture because they're at best not what they claim to be, but at worst, like, overt fraud.
Totally.
So how do you, as a first question, what do you do with that question?
Yeah. So I can totally understand it. I mean, here's the deal. There's plenty that we know about Joseph Smith that believers can go, this is who he is and he's a prophet. There's plenty for non-believers to look at and say he was a total fraud. There's evidence of this. There's plenty of evidence on both sides for both of those. You can be a very smart, intelligent person and you can see it that way. From where I stand, I think that both of those views of Joseph Smith are far more certain than I am willing to say. I don't know. I don't know who Joseph Smith was. I know I've been fed a story about him, and I know that I've been told lots of things on both sides of this about him, and I believe a lot of both of them. So I think that life is so much more complicated than we like to think. We've been told such a simple story about Joseph Smith. Even the first vision, like, you know, one of the things I did at the Living School with Richard Rohr, they talk a lot about the mystics. They talk a lot about people. And a mystic, I heard a great short definition the other day. A mystic is someone who doesn't just want to talk about God. A mystic is someone who wants to experience God. And there were a lot of these in the early Catholic Church, a lot of mystics that have some really beautiful writings about their experience with God, right? As I'm learning about that, I'm thinking Joseph was a mystic. And in none of these experiences, like you read The Cloud of Unknowing, you read some Teresa of Avila, you read some of these people, and you're like, I don't think in the history of God showing God, if God exists, God's presence to humanity, has it been so simple as, you know, an experience that I can go out, have this amazing experience and then go tell you as if it's a story and have you actually understand what it is I just experienced. I just don't even think that's possible. I think that mystical experience and true connection with something bigger than us is messy. It's messy and possibly borders on psychotic. I don't know. I'm open to all kinds of explanations for this. I really am. But I don't know. I kind of like the idea that Joseph had an experience with the divine, that something opened up for him, that something happened to the kid that made him think in ways that were kind of different for the culture of his time. he just wasn't jiving with the Protestant religions that were presented to him. And I think it's for a lot of the reasons that the church doesn't resonate with me sometimes. I think it's the same kind of thing. I've often said, I think if Joseph Smith showed up today, showed up in his local ward, joined a ward, started going, first of all, no one would want to like give him callings of any kind of like anything that mattered, any leadership callings. I think he'd get pretty annoyed pretty quickly and he'd go and start his own church. That's just my view of who Joseph
Even
was.
in our church today.
Yeah.
Especially in our church today.
Yeah. Because I think we've codified things that he was trying to say, this is what's wrong with Protestantism. We don't want to do this. Mm-hmm. This is not what we want to do. So I see him just being kind of nutty, kind of genius, and kind of, going through his life, getting his ego a little too involved, probably having some personality disorders, like doing some really crazy crap with polygamy and all that kind of stuff. But I can hold that something divine can come through that, because I think something divine can come through every single person on this planet.
So what's a framing for you of the Book of Mormon and the Book of Abraham?
Yeah.
If there maybe weren't gold plates, and if there really wasn't even maybe a Moroni, and we know the Book of Abraham is not a translation. So what's a framing for you of what happened, what they are, and what they mean to you?
I mean, I'm open to a lot of things here. I'm open to him having found something that he thought was gold plates, or, found some not even really ancient artifact, or found something. I'm open to him there not been having been plates. I don't know. I'm open to a lot of explanations of what that is, but I think something flowed through him. It obviously wasn't terribly important because the plates weren't always in the room when he was doing his thing, right? So he's got his head in a hat, and he's got a seer stone, and he's been raised in this folk magic kind of place where all of this kind of makes sense to the people going on around him. I think he kind of really thought he could find some treasure. I think he really kind of thought he could do this stuff. I think he studied with people about seer stones and the women in his life, and his mother had visions and his grandmother had visions. And I think this was all just part of the soup. And I think he was picking up on the mound builder stuff. And I think he was in contact with the Hebrews. And I think he was in contact with all of this stuff. And he just like synthesized all of this story and all of this thing and gave us this Book of Mormon. I mean, and personally, I'm still super confused. I haven't done enough research to say what actually happened there. How important was, I've heard differing things, how important was the Book of Mormon in early conversion of people and joining the church? How important was any of that? How important was the first vision? How much was it talked about? I don't even know. Like, we've been told the story that it was so like, this is what happened, and that's how we know. As I dig more into and hear more of the experts and hear more of the stories, I just think it was far messier and far more fun, actually, than what we try to make it. So I don't know.
So if there weren't plates, or if there weren't a Moroni, you're saying there's one scenario, I guess, and I think I've even heard Maxine say this, where even if he made fake plates, that he believed he was channeling real stories of ancient inhabitants of America. And if he had to create plates so that people would believe, or if he thought he was reproducing plates that had a parallel existence in some other universe, whatever it was, that there's some sincerity there, that he really did think the scripture he was producing was genuine and authentic scripture.
Possibly.
In some way. I'm
not convinced that he even thought that Nephi existed. He might have. I don't know that he even really thought that. I mean, the tree of life, the iron rod, the Lehi's vision, that we know that his father had that dream, right? I mean, I'm fine with him pulling from those things to make a metaphor. I mean, it's a beautiful metaphor for life. I'm fine with him putting that in as scripture and then putting himself in as Nephi, curious what that means, and that this is representative of something and not even a real story of real historical people. I'm okay with him thinking he was doing that. I'm okay with him not thinking he was doing that. I think there are a lot of possibilities.
But there's a lot of people that are just like, wait, it either happened or it didn't. It either happened as he said or it didn't. And if it didn't happen as he said, then it's fraud and deception.
Sure.
What allows you to not get snagged on that?
Probably just not enough research, because I'm genuinely confused about what story he presented at any given time of his life. I don't know, because I know what I've been taught. I don't think that's what happened. I don't know what happened. I haven't done enough study to say, if he was out saying, this is exactly what happened, and I don't know, then I would have to say I'd probably lean more toward maybe he was trying to pull one over on people, or I don't know, because the evidence doesn't fully line up there. But I haven't done enough research. So in my little mind of how I view Joseph, right, I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt to say, I'm not sure we know what he thought he was doing. I don't know. I don't know what he thought he was doing.
But if I dig a tiny bit deeper, what I kind of hear you saying is you kind of don't, it's not important to you. And that's how you started. In other words, if I'm going to restate what I think I hear you saying is, whatever happened, happened.
Yes.
We're left with where we are now.
Yes.
And what you're much more interested in over what really did happen and was it true or not and was it historical or authentic.
Yes.
It's more like some text got produced. It's led to this movement of people and to this whole cultural and religious movement.
Yep.
I'm in it now.
Yep.
And I'm not interested in that as much as I am in where am I now and where can this take me?
Yeah. So it's, I'm interested in it. I'm super interested in it. Like, obviously the guy really did, I think he did think he was doing something. I mean, he's trying to translate Kinderhook plates and Abraham, the Book of Abraham stuff that's coming from papyri that doesn't have, I'm fairly convinced doesn't have anything to do with Abraham, but something is being channeled through him. Something really kind of cool at times is being channeled through him. So whether he believed that or not, or he was pulling, I don't know, what we have is extraordinary. And it's the basis for something. It's the basis for some sort of connection to God.
So you see Mormon scripture as extraordinary?
Yes and no. I see all scripture as extraordinary. I mean, I see it, I'm very fascinated with people explaining to me their connection with the divine. I am really excited about that. So I think this is authentic, like American scripture, as much as any scripture is authentic. I think all scripture is a person's connection and experience with the divine, and then they wrote it down. And then some people came along and said, that's really important and that's really meaningful. And somewhere along the way, even things that people at one point didn't necessarily hold as literal, other people have held as literal. And even at that literal level, they've found good in it.
So for you, scripture is what?
Man's connection to the divine, man's experience with the divine.
I would even say, not to answer for you, but man's attempt to articulate their experience with the divine.
I like that even better.
I don't mean to correct you.
No.
I'm just
no, it's adding to it, and I love it. Because I don't always have the words for this stuff. It's very fuzzy, right? So yeah, I appreciate that articulation, and that resonates. It is. It's people trying to articulate what it is. And experience with the divine, to me, is really hard to articulate. It's really hard to articulate. I can't explain to you. There are certain things in life that I can't fully explain to you and have you understand. You know, I can't have my deepest suffering or my most amazing spiritual experiences or an experience of what it's like to hold my newborn child and watch a sleeping child. I can't fully explain to you what that experience is. It's kind of out of the realm of words. And I think we've really tried to codify things that, and make them very material and very concrete that I don't think we're ever meant to be.
I love it. Okay. And then the second part of that with Joseph Smith is some would say, no, wait a minute. He's propositioning 14-year-olds. He's propositioning other men's wives. He's sending a man on a mission and then propositioning the guy's wife while he's on the mission, like marrying sister pairs, mother-daughter pairs, lying to Emma about it. Like there's all of this sort of like, not just, oh, he was a bit of a rascal.
Oh, yeah.
You know, some are like, you know, and this are, you know, heavy words, but like sexual predator type behavior, the type of stuff where if I did it, I would either be killed or put in jail. He was doing all that really serious stuff with kids as young as 14. So like disqualifies himself on a moral basis. How have you worked through that?
Well, if you need your prophets to be moral, then I don't necessarily think that our worst elements define us in this life. No matter who we are, we have a tendency to do that as a society, to make our worst moments or our best moments define us. We like to put people in buckets, right? I think what Joseph Smith did was horrible. I cringe every time I look at all of those early church presidents and the ages of the women that they were marrying. It's a problem. I think that Section 132 says everything we kind of need to know. Here's Joseph Smith going, hey, like Abraham did it. Is this a thing? I'm restoring all this stuff. Like, how about me? You know, I mean,
I want some of that.
I want some of that. I mean, that's kind of how I read the first part of the Section 132, you know,
you better get in line.
And then let me see how I can coerce my wife into getting on board. I mean, that's kind of sums up Section 132 for me, right? Like, I think that not everything, obviously, was channeled from what any God I would believe in. It was not all channeled by him. Like he was off. He was off in a lot of ways. Really, really off. Yeah.
And
I think people can have inspiration that are really, really off. We have to have other ways of discerning what is good and what is true, other than I'm labeling this person as a prophet, ergo everything he did was good. I just don't think that's the way it works anymore. I grew up thinking that was the way it works. I no longer think that's the way it works. I just see no evidence of that. I think that everyone in my life that I come across has good and bad in them, including myself. We all do. We all do. Some it's extreme. Some people have a real gift for a connection with God. Some people don't. I mean, for the first 4 decades of my life, I sure didn't have that talent. So I don't know. I kind of take people how they come. And I think it's problematic that we're not willing to look at Joseph Smith for all of who he is on both sides, in or out. I kind of think that we are too certain about who that man was, to be honest, on either side.
So the framing, another part of the framing that we're trying to recover from is this. This is the one true church, and our prophet talks to God directly, and this is the path. And yes, you know, we'll allow for some goodness in other religious traditions, but we're the right one. They're the frauds, or they're the false ones, or the, the inferior ones. And our prophet now literally talks to God in an exclusive way that no other religious leader does. And by the way, our ordinances count. Our baptisms count, our marriages count, and everyone else's baptisms and marriages aren't legitimate and don't count. What do you do with all that?
So I think that that is a very human thing to have something that resonates deeply with us and to make it exclusive. I hear those words of Richard Rohr in my ear, that our egos want to be separate and superior. I hear that. And I go back to where Joseph Smith is like, we just want to be the repository of all truth wherever it comes from. This is what we want. So we're going to take it in from everywhere. How does that jive with like, we're the one true? Well, he was trying to make it maybe the one true, where it's the one that's not going to reject all of the stuff if it comes from somewhere else. And maybe that message just got morphed over time into something that where people were like, oh, we got it, and you guys don't. I mean, there's so much in that, in the early years of the church. You know, we were problematic to our neighbors in many of the places we were in, right? People are tribal. People, if you are not paying attention to what our egos are doing, we do tend toward some really problematic things. And we got early on in our history, got into some us versus them thinking that was appropriate for the development of where we were at the time, that it has really informed, I think, the way that we take in the gospel today. So I don't know, if we had Joseph Smith here, we could ask him, what does it mean to you to be the one true church? We may get a very different answer than if we have President Nelson next to us saying, what is the one true church? I see ordinances in a very different way than I used to. I find them to be very meaningful in a way that I find human ritual to be very, very meaningful. I do have trouble these days seeing them as magical. But I do see them as touching on the divine. This was one of the things that broke my shelf early on. That nagging thing, along with the what does the Holy Ghost mean? What does that mean? What does that mean that I have the gift of the Holy Ghost and someone else doesn't? I also just could not get my brain around why a Mormon priesthood holder laying his hands on someone would be any more effective than a Catholic mother praying over her child in the middle of the night. I can't square that. The only thing that makes sense to me is that if there is a God, that power is given to everybody. And as people, sometimes to make it material, to make it real, we put ritual around it, and we decide who can have it and who can't, and who can, this is your job, this is your role, this is whatever. We put that around it. And then again, over generations, we take it way too seriously. It's the only sense I can make of it, because I truly believe that there is healing power from human to human everywhere. That is, I wouldn't put it in the miraculous bucket, but there's something that happens between people that's healing.
If ordinances don't have to be literally performed with kind of LDS Church authority, that means tens of thousands of mostly senior LDS Church members and a ton of members are doing all these ordinances in the temple, thinking that it means one thing. We're getting people's baptism so they can go to heaven. We're getting people sealed so that their marriages can last in heaven. All that money, all that time, all that effort is being spent that may not actually be in reality doing the thing that people think is being done.
Possibly. Yeah. Possibly.
And what does that do for you? What does that make you feel or think? Or?
Well, on some days it makes me kind of sad. Like, you know, it on one level, it feels like maybe a misplaced effort, that there's so many good things we could be doing in the world for the people that are here today. On another level, I think it's really beautiful that we connect to ancestors. This is something very human. We're not the only people to have it be very important to have this lineage and connection to our ancestors, right? I mean, there's a reason that Ancestry.com is a gigantic company outside of the realm of the church, right? There's a lot of Eastern religions that are based on ancestors that are very fundamental. So in that respect, I feel like there's something really beautiful that's also happening there. There's something really beautiful about the idea of sealing people together that makes this world not just an individual salvation project that's just all about me, that it's connected in relationship to other people. And so I actually find temple work to be very important in that it, again, brings an idea that's beautiful into the material body where we can actually go and do something in a ritualistic way that honors that. That is beautiful to me. It's both all wrapped up.
Regarding kind of modern day prophets, once you kind of lose your faith, it's a very common perspective to say these are just a bunch of super old dudes, really patriarchal, 40s World War II mindset, racist, sexist, homophobic. And not only are they not prophetic, not only are they not ahead of the times, they're always reliably 30 years behind the times on pick any major issue. Women, ERA, civil rights, LGBT, always behind the times.
Yep.
So how do you stay in a church where prophets are kind of worshipped and honored as being this one thing, whereas they may not even be worth honoring at that level, but instead may be super disappointments on some level?
Yeah. Well, I find it really problematic. I find it problematic for us, and I find it problematic for them. That we have this imagination of this hero worship. I think there's something very human and also something super American about hero worship. I don't know. I was kind of struck. I just saw a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you've seen this. It's a video of Stephen Colbert when he goes to visit Jacinda Ardern. Have you seen this video? Look it up. It's super fun. She picks him up at the airport in a Hyundai, and they're just driving through New Zealand. And, but it just, you would never see the head of state in America doing something like that, right? Like there's something very American about the way we put people on a pedestal. I don't think it's good for anybody, frankly. I don't think that's the way Jesus sees people. Like if we're getting down to like what really the gospel is about, I don't think the hero worship helps anybody. I think we have been told a narrative of what the prophet is that I don't think is super helpful. And we expect too much of our prophets. We expect them to be outside of place and time and to just have this pure mind meld with the divine, that somehow they should know. I mean, what in the Bible, in any kind of scripture gives anyone that kind of an idea that that's what a prophet is capable of seeing something bigger and better. The only people who could see beyond came from the margins. And guess what? In the Old Testament, that's where the prophets came from. They were the ones that could see what was going on and spoke truth to power. That's who Jesus was. Jesus was not the head of the church in his time. He was a Jew who was saying, hey, guys, there's something wrong here. And he was speaking from the margins. So I think to expect the people in the core that are leading our church to be the prophetic voice is not realistic. Now, we can sustain them as being the people who have their roles and their calls to lead the church and make all the decisions that they make and run the ship. Like, great. Do I wish that there was a little diversity at the top? Yes, I do. Would we be a better church if there was? I think so. If we had more women's voices, if we had more diverse voices with race and all the different ways that we can have diversity, I think we would be benefited with that, right? Because we have a collection of mostly Utah Mormon men who grew up at a certain time. And I don't think that gives us the full diversity, because I don't think God just pours it on to us. Obviously, God does not do that. So yeah, if that's what you have, you're going to be 30 years behind the times. And you're always going to be playing catch up. I don't expect that from the people who lead my church.
So what is their value to you?
So I think that their value is that they, I think, are sincere people who've obviously could be going off and enjoying their retirement in completely different ways and are running themselves to the bone, right? To try to fulfill their duty to what they believe this church needs. I think that they try to stay as open and close to the inspiration of God as they possibly know how to do. And I think they're doing their best, given their frame of mind. Their utility is that they've been doing this a long time, and there's a trustworthiness to that. And it is up to us, each one of us, to have the discernment to understand, just like with Joseph Smith, like with anybody in this world, it is up to us to have the discernment of when they're speaking in resonance with God and when they're not. I just don't think they always do. And I think they would say that. You can't look at you cannot be honest with the history of this church and not see that prophets were speaking out of resonance with what we would imagine God is, and that we are constantly moving in a way of restoration. We've actually, I think, shackled ourselves by thinking it's all going to come through these men. We need to go back to what Joseph was saying and start looking outside the church and collecting in more truth, because I think we've hamstrung ourselves in thinking it's all going to come through this way. So there's value. There's value in having wonderful people, good-hearted people trying to hold your organization together and do their best to move things forward in a good direction. That's the value.
So we kind of started this thread with me saying this isn't Mormonism.
Yeah.
And what I mean is it's not the Mormonism that I was raised in.
For sure.
And then you kind of embraced that and said, yeah, it is sort of. There's roots of all this stuff in it. You can find it, but it's also you are doing Mormonism differently than we were all trained to.
Correct.
So now let me come back to that question again. When people say, you've made up your own church. This is the Church of Jana Spangler. Like they always do that. Whoever it is that I interview who's got an orthodox way. Yeah. It's always the Church of Jana Spangler, you know, or Jim Bennett. Jim Bennett's got his own church, the Church of Jim Bennett. Right. You know? So not to say that, but like, what are you doing then? So you're in this church, you see it in all the ways, all the good and bad. It's lots of ands. Yeah. Lots of good, lots of bad, lots of problems, lots of beauty. Yeah. I see that being an important part of what you're doing. Yeah. Mormonism and everything else. Yeah. So describe now what it is you're doing in Mormonism. Like what, and I think this is probably the time to introduce Richard Rohr's first and second half of life. Yeah. Let's start there. Okay. So talk to us about, Falling Upward or whichever book is your favorite or the training you've received. Talk just really quickly about who Richard Rohr is, what he means to both Catholics and religious people and secular people everywhere. Introduce the idea of first and second half of life, and then explain how Mormonism has become the context for which you're kind of on your spiritual journey. Okay. Yeah. So, Falling Upward is a great place for people, if they're curious about Richard Rohr, it's a great place for them to start. It really resonates, I think, with Mormons. And partially because, when I met Richard Rohr in one of the retreats that we did for the program, I brought up some questions. One of the things that resonates a lot in progressive Mormon circles is a concept he came up with about living on the edge of insight. And it's kind of a framework for how organizations work. And David Brooks wrote a really great article summarizing this.
and used it kind of in a political, you can look at it in political groups, you can look at it in institutions of all kinds, but kind of talking about this idea that I've alluded to where there's a core for whom it works. People on the edges are the ones who have a clearer view of what's going wrong. And there are people who, when it does go wrong, leave, and they're on the outside. And now we've got kind of the inside, and then there's the outsiders, and they're kind of lobbing bombs at each other. But it's the people on the edge of inside who really can see both and love both, who might possibly have a way to actually move the institution forward. So this is kind of his idea. If you have 2 or 3 people in any given congregation of a Christian church in America, you can start to make a difference. So this resonates with a lot of progressive Mormons. They're like, oh, we're kind of noticing some of the problems. We want to be part of the solution, right? So I asked him this. I'm a woman. I'm in a hierarchical, patriarchal group. What prayer do I have in living on the edge of inside and having any kind of influence, right? When he found out I was a Mormon, the first thing he said was, oh, you Mormons, you do first half of life better than anyone, bar none.
What does he mean by first half of life?
So first half of life is, and he describes this in the book, first half of life is a phase of life we all need to go through. It's the phase of life where we're growing up, we're learning who we are, we're building our identities, we're learning our values, we're figuring out where we fit in society, we're figuring out what we want to study, who we want to marry, what we want our life to look like. We're typically on a career building path where we're thinking about achievement and doing things in the right way and being a good citizen. And people who do first half of life well, it's a beautiful thing. Like they're really efficient. They're really helpful. It's the easiest way to grow up is how he phrases that. It's the easiest way to grow up. And he says, he grew up in Kansas and, at a time of America that mirrors a lot of, I think, what Mormons are still trying to do in the way that we bring people up, right? It's societally. So it's very structured. It's very good. And he said, you guys really do. He goes, I really mean it, bar none. You guys are the best at first half of life. And
okay, wait. And so just to restate, just because this is this is really important, and
yes.
I've tried to talk a lot about this in my retreats and workshops too, because I'm inspired by it.
Yeah.
If I'm hearing you right,
yeah.
What I hear you saying, and what I think Richard Rohr is saying, is that there's this thing that transcends any particular religious tradition. Yeah. Certainly Mormonism, certainly even Christianity.
Yes.
It's the fact that we're born, and we have to make it to adulthood. With identity, morality, community, spirituality, a sense of self.
Yes.
We have to stay alive. We have to become independent. We have to become financially self-sufficient, start a family. Yep. And we've all got to do that.
Yes.
That's sort of like meeting a lot of, if you've got Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you got to check a lot of those boxes. Food, shelter, health, check, marriage, kids, check. And it's helpful to have a structure to kind of check all those boxes.
Absolutely.
If you're just if you're just plopped in a house on your own, go figure that out. It's going to be super hard. Even if you have parents, but they're busy. So if you've got youth leaders, if you've got primary, if you've got songs, if you've got temple work and and callings and BYU or University of Utah and all these leaders looking out for you, kind of the whole it takes a village thing. Yep. You're gonna reach age 25 with a lower chance of STIs, a lower chance of unwanted pregnancies, a lower chance of death by accident, a lower chance of drug and alcohol addiction, a higher chance of a better education, a higher chance of health and well-being. That's kind of the idea.
Correct.
And what you're saying, Richard Rohr says, who's kind of a world-renowned expert on faith crises. Yeah. You're saying that he says to you, Mormonisms do that first half of life almost better than anyone else he knows. Did I get that right?
You got that right.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's first half of life.
That's first half of life.
But that's just half of life.
Yeah.
And it may not be when you're 50. It may not be when you're 40.
It's not chronological.
Right.
And some people stay in first half of life their whole lives, and it works well. It works well for you.
Some people never.
There's no reason to leave first half of life unless it stops working for you. You know?
And what this reminds me of is how I started Mormon Stories with discussions of James Fowler's Stages of Faith.
Yes.
I kind of think of first half of life as Fowler stage 3.
Yep. It gets you to stage 3 really well.
Yeah, stage 3. But it's orthodox, it's literal, it's black and white.
Yep.
It's like Pleasantville. It's like the Truman Show. You don't really you're in it and it feels great.
Yep.
But you probably don't see life very realistically. You probably aren't sensitive to a lot of things you should be sensitive about. It's a big function of privilege. And if I'm going to get a little bit risky here, maybe it's naive. Maybe it's insensitive to a lot of realities in the world. And maybe it's immature. What else? What else is wrong with first half of life? You can say nobody has to leave it.
Yeah.
But built into this whole discussion of Fowler stage 3 versus Fowler stage 5 or first half of life versus second half of life is that in some sense there's something higher or better or more advanced in the second half. So
this is a very Mormon and very American way of thinking. I just want to acknowledge that and every time I love Fowler stages of faith. I'm a big proponent. I talk about it all the time, and it's problematic. And the reason it's problematic is we think in these ways, like somehow stage 4 is better than 3, 5 is better than 4. And I don't see human development as that. I see value in every stage of growth and everywhere someone is. It's really more about the perspective that we are taking than it is about us being able to be a good person, to do well, to, So I would say that the people in stage 1, in first half of life, I don't know that they're doing anything terribly wrong. I know a lot of people who I would suspect have a center of gravity in 3 who are out doing far more good in the world than I am. Full stop. They are, and they have different skills and they have different drawbacks. And just because we are complicating our faith and moving into a 4 or a 5, it does bring some benefits to it, and it brings some awarenesses of the marginalized. It brings other things in a way that, I don't even know that is, that's totally fair, but it can bring a bigger view of the world, and it brings all sorts of other problems. There are people who may be at a stage 5 kind of a faith, but their lives are super hard and super problematic, where someone at stage 3 is having a much more fulfilling experience and maybe doing more good in the world. So that's hard for us to hold, because all of us want to look at Fowler stages of faith as a ladder to the celestial kingdom, or to, being all that.
Or first half is
first half and second half.
And second half is
correct.
Being mature. Right?
Correct.
Describe what is the thing between first and second half of life
that happens?
Yeah, what is
that? Well, this is where the title of the book comes in, Falling Upward. Something has to go wrong. Something has to happen in your life that invites you into a deeper complexity. Something has to shatter the illusion that the first half of life is all there is. In Mormonism, it can be a faith crisis. It can be, having a child come out as LGBT. It's something that makes you think about things differently and gives you that cognitive dissonance.
How about buckling under perfectionism?
Absolutely.
Unfulfilled spiritually for decades.
Yes, it can be that. Something has to make the way that you're doing it not work anymore. And there are 10 million ways to experience that in life. And it can feel so earth-shattering. It feels like a death. We do not, I mean, we have books for how to mourn lots of kinds of tragedies in life, and we're just now starting to have some that recognize this kind of a shift in our perspective, in our identities, in the way that we're doing things, and the way we see the world as being as life-shattering as it is, because it is. And so what Richard Rohr is trying to do with this is to show that there is something else on the other side of that, that there is this second half of life that looks very different than the first half of life. The things that are important to us in the second half of life are not the things that are important to us in the first half of life. One of the downfalls of staying in first half of life, one of the things he says in the book is, he uses the analogy of climbing the ladder, you know, your whole life climbing the ladder, doing all this work to climb the ladder, only to realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. And it can just feel so disorienting. So, if we let it, if we're able to move through this, what second half of life brings is this deeper connection to our inner world, our deeper connection to self. Religion on the in second half of life is more focused on transformation rather than transaction. He talks about first half of life being more transactional and second half of life being more transformational. We don't need the spotlight quite as much in the second half of life. We're just kind of happy to be part of the dance. We start to recognize that maybe we were worshiping a prophet instead of God. Maybe we recognize that the things we felt were really super important are not as important as just the sanctity of humanity and being good to each other and to creation and to the earth and to one another. Our priorities completely shift. And, you know, I think, frankly, the deeper parts of the gospel, I think, of what Jesus Christ was trying to bring to the world point more to second half of life than first half of life.
Give some examples.
I think that Jesus was trying to help the religious people of his day see that it wasn't all about the rules. It's kind of astounding. When I learned about some of this from a different viewpoint, I learned a different kind of Jesus there, but I think it's the kind of Jesus that resonates more with how I read the New Testament. It's kind of astounding how we have made it so that Jesus cares so much about the rules, that God cares so much about how we do things and the obedience to the rules, when that was not who Jesus was. If anything, Jesus was breaking the rules.
He's like, chill out on the rules.
He was, yeah. But he wasn't throwing them out. And this is the thing that's extraordinary about Jesus, is he wasn't just saying religion is not important. He was saying it's really important, but you need to hold it in the right context. You can't let the rules overtake the heart. You can't let the way that we're moving through life and trying to order it overtake the deeper meaning of the Spirit of loving one another, of caring for one another, of noticing who is hurt and who is on the margins. I mean, he was an example of doing things that made the religious people of his day super uncomfortable. That was what his mission was. And I think that he was also trying to invite us into the realities of life. I think so many of us use religion to kind of, they call it spiritual bypassing. Like, we just want religion to make us feel good. We want to have a way to deal with the hard things in life, deal with the prospect of death, and we just want to feel good. Like, don't bring me problems in a Sunday school lesson, because we just want to feel good. We want to be inspired. That's it. I think Jesus was saying, look, the way of salvation, the way to get through this life is the path of descent. He went to the bottom of everything. He wasn't trying to make it fancy. He wasn't trying to climb the ladder of anything. He was trying to go to the depths of despair, the depths of where people were hurting. And he didn't just say, I'm going to take that for you. That's the Christian message of Western Christianity today, is I'm going to take that for you so you don't have to suffer. What I hear Jesus say is, come follow me. I am the way. If you want to go there, you go there with me. Disciples, you come to Gethsemane with me. You don't just stay out there and I got this. You come with me.
What does that mean, to come with Jesus?
That means...
What does it mean that Jesus is the way?
It means...
That feels exclusive. That feels like, well, Muslims aren't welcome, and Buddhists aren't welcome because Jesus is the way. I can hear how that sounds that way. Not at all what I mean. I think it's a wisdom. He was an example of the wisdom pattern of growth for mankind. So what that is we have to actually pay attention to the suffering. We actually have to pay attention to what is hard in life. We actually have to recognize that this life can just wreck you. And we have to be willing to have that process transform us. We have to let that process inform us on how we need to allow things to die that we have held on to as so dear. We have to let go of it. Because if we keep holding on in our brains to what we think is the way, we're never going to find it. We've got to let go of it and just let ourselves be vulnerable. We've got to let our pain inform us. Then and we're not going to like it. This is the pattern of Jesus saying, take the cup from us. Take the cup away. I don't want to deal with this. Please remove it. But then he sticks with it. He allows himself to willingly die. We don't know what's going on for 3 days. He wasn't immediately resurrected, right? We're in this liminal space of, I don't know where I am. This is frightening. This is scary. And then eventually 3 days later, we can have a resurrection to something. I think it's the story of all of us. This is not just the story of our salvation at the end of the life. I think this is the story of humanity and the way that we move through our individual growth. And I think he was showing us this example of this. And yet all of the people who have followed Jesus ever since have been trying to climb back up the staircase he came down, to show us how to be human, to show us how to do this, and to show us that we are also divine. We are part of this. We are part of what he was trying to show us. So I think that the way that we've held Christianity has made us hate our humanity and shun our humanity and feel bad about our humanity. And you can hear a lot of my own upbringing in this. Like, this is why this stands out to me, right? I've hated my humanity most of my life. And now when I look at the Jesus story, I go, wow, you know what? And Joseph Smith, by the way, brought this idea to the Protestant world he was in. The Protestant world at the time thought humanity was debased and humanity was awful. Humanity is a piece of crap, but Jesus can save me. Jesus is all divine. I'm worth nothing, and Jesus, I need to just give it over to Jesus, and Jesus can save me. Joseph Smith said, no, the nature of Jesus is that he's all human and all divine, and guess what? So are you. This opens up all kinds of possibilities for us. All kinds of possibilities. It's a wisdom pattern. So when I say Jesus is the way, I think I'm saying I don't think that any particular person has to affirm Jesus's story to have that be the way of life and meaning and whatever you want to call salvation. That same pattern happens for Buddhists. That same pattern happens for Hindus. That same pattern happens for everyone in the world. It's just that Jesus was a super impactful view of what that is. Beautiful symbol.
So I don't know. Richard Rohr is he says, I'm Orthodox. He gets accused of not being Orthodox all the time because he speaks in these ways. But he says, hey, he's like, I'm Orthodox. I totally believe in a bodily resurrection. Like he really does believe that Christ is that. He does make room for this to be the whole human story. But I don't know. I'm still working through all of that. But what I do know is I am really, really, really inspired by Jesus. I'm inspired by the way he has invited us to think in different ways. The parable of the laborers in the vineyard. We hate that. That parable just like strikes at the heart of all things first half of life, fairness, the way we think about things. The person who shows up at the vineyard at the beginning of the day, the person who shows up 1 hour, just for the last hour should not be paid the same. We don't like this. I think Jesus was trying to invite us into a different way of thinking, that is, you've got to stop thinking about that from your ego. There is a deeper sense of something here that you guys are missing, that you need to enter into the stream of life, and you do it from the heart. You don't act your way there.
So I am loving this. I'm loving this. Mm-hmm. Like I'm inspired. I'm like taking all these notes. Mm-hmm. And I realize now we're coming back to the second half of what I interrupted you. We went on this huge segue because you were saying Mormons do first half of life really well. Because like, as you're telling me all this stuff that I'm like inspired by and writing down, of course, in my mind, my Orthodox Mormon mind, it's going back to the conversation we had about the Givenses, Terrell and Fiona Givenses' new book. Because I'm like, no, wait a minute. No, Jesus... we commit all these sins and they add up mathematically. And so someone's got to suffer. And so the atonement was Jesus getting punished Y amount, which is all my sins, plus all the other people's sins, which is XYZ PDQ, because there's got to be that's the atonement. It's this mathematical. So it's a totally different view of Jesus. And by the way, it was the Mormon Church that taught me all that. So if I'm going to kind of abstract it a bit, basically, this really small, unhelpful, almost harmful way of, I really want to say perverting or bastardizing the teachings of Jesus was taught to me by the Mormon Church and continues to be kind of the mainstream Orthodox teachings around Mormonism. So then I ask, like, if Mormonism was the poison to the second half of life, how do you practice second half of life Christianity in a church that seems to be allergic to it? Yeah.
It's not easy. And I want to say one thing.
Also?
Yeah. So here's the thing. I want to say one thing, because you're saying, this atonement way that we've seen it is really, really harmful. I mean, if you think back to my story and what I told you about how the atonement was so important to me, the foundation of my testimony at that point in my life, the way that I was holding atonement was actually not harmful. That was a huge step forward for me. I think that sometimes we get to a place where
you even mean the disciplinary council. You even mean the court of love where you were threatened with church discipline.
Yes.
Even the church offering itself up as the cure to the sickness. You're saying all that somehow you look back and you're not angry at the church for doing that to you. And you were crying with gratitude.
Yep.
Even though you now see it was maybe even messed up in lots of ways. Fill in the
100%.
How was it good for you? Because so many ex-Mormons are like, the church hurt me in all these ways, and I'm angry at the church.
And they should be. I just want to validate that. They should be, and they were hurt. Hands down. If you're feeling the hurt, guess what? You were hurt. You were hurt. And by the way, anger and our level of anger, I think, is oftentimes in proportion to the hurt that we're feeling. And actually, John, I have to give you a shout out for this, because I learned this partially. You facilitated me learning a lot of this lesson, because I don't know if you remember when you moved to Holiday, and I found out how close of neighbors we are. I reached out to you and asked if we could get together. We went to breakfast, and I asked you, can I be part of one of your retreats? Can I come help out in some way? And it was purposeful, because I knew at that point in my faith journey that I was still feeling threatened and judgy of people who were super angry. And I knew that if I was going to be helpful and if I was going to do this work, I needed to face that. I needed to understand that. And I knew that a lot of your followers, I knew the people that would be coming to your retreats, that are not the people who are coming to Dan's retreats, who I do those with Dan and Natasha now, when it's not COVID. There's a different element, and I needed to face that. And honestly, that retreat that I did with you was life-changing for me, for my, again, another breaking open of my heart in compassion, because I was confronted with people who were rubbing me the wrong way because they were angry, right? And they weren't making space for other people to be okay in the church. But I had the experience over those 2 days to work with people in a close enough way to be able to witness their hearts, and that truth came through to me. That some of the people who are coming across as the most angry, the ones that people in the church are looking at going, but they're just so angry. It's justifying that they made the wrong decision to leave the church because they're just so angry. They're awful, you know? If this were a good decision for their life, they'd be happy and be chasing butterflies, right? And it turned that completely on its head for me. And I recognized it almost made me more mad at the church that some people who have held this thing so tightly in such black and white literal ways, in the way that they were taught, and they were held on a pedestal for it, and they were given leadership callings for it, and they were told that they were amazing and faithful and wonderful. And the minute that crumbles for them and they find out things about the history that they were never taught, it is violence to them. For us to then turn our back on them and say, you can't be angry about this. And we're going to take you from putting you on a pedestal to completely exiling you and seeing you as a threat to all things good. It's immoral what we do to people in that way. And I learned that lesson, actually, from just diving in. A life lesson I will take from that is that if something is threatening to you, lean in. Because an enemy is a person whose story you don't know. Something that is not resonating with you and that is challenging you, lean in and know more about it. Because, I don't know, humanity is beautiful to me. That cracked something open for me that made me say, you know what? We need to allow everyone to have their journey. And if you are angry and hurt, it's for a good reason. And we need to listen to that. And if we would be willing, if as members of the church, if we would be willing to listen to that, we would be so much better. We would be more Christ-like. We would be doing the mission of the church so much better. We are missing this opportunity by just writing people off. And it's largely because we are uncomfortable. We're uncomfortable with discomfort. We are uncomfortable with what is hard. We just want our religion to make us feel good. That's first half of life.
So I love this. So then, another trope, the ex-Mormon trope for believers who stay in the church in an unorthodox way is, well, go be a Unitarian.
Yeah.
Go Community of Christ. Go there's 1,000 different churches you can go to that are more they aren't homophobic, they aren't as patriarchal, they aren't as sexist, they aren't as racist, and they're not as bad in the second half of life. In fact, you could argue there are certain congregations here in Utah, again, Community of Christ or the Unitarian Universalists, where they're like optimized for helping you in second half of life. It's like, let's do soup kitchens, let's do advanced sex education, let's do Buddhism and meditation and mindfulness, and let's study Eckhart Tolle as part of the curriculum. So like, or don't do any religion at all. Just like watch good TED Talks, listen to, Glennon Doyle and Eckhart Tolle, and make a good little pot of friends and read good books and have tea and coffee and just enjoy the rest of your life. So this is a really long way of setting up the question of what are the benefits of doing this within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 2021? Why bother?
Yeah.
Just go live a great, happy life outside.
It's a really good question because, I think that there are a lot of people doing all those things that you just said, and that is the right place for them. And I think that second half of life does not have to look religious. And it can look religious. It just depends on what calls to you. It depends on what needs that you're having, what kind of a connection to spirituality you want to have, and where do you want to have it. There are a lot of factors for me. I have a believing husband. I have kids who are being raised in the church. I have, it is my home, even as hurtful and drives me crazy sometimes, to go to certain meetings. And it is certainly not for me today the whole of my spiritual connection. I would say that I supplement a lot. I think that even if you stick with literal belief in the church, you get to a certain point and you've got to supplement a lot, or you're just going to get bored.
It's oftentimes all milk and never meat. Right?
I mean, we're going over the same things every 4 years, but that also is situational. There are some words that they're really going there and they're doing some really cool things and they are having deeper discussions that some people may want to have. So it's pockety too.
There's also, we have to admit, there are people benefiting from the repetition and the simplicity.
Absolutely. There are people who love that. You
can never create any experience that's going to be great for everyone experiencing it. You just literally can't.
You literally can't. You literally can't. Yeah. I don't know. I may be more open in another city to be going and church hopping. I do church hop. I mean, I think I ran into you at an Oasis meeting once. I take all of it in, and I do. I've got a couple of favorites that I like to go visit and listen to what their particular preachers have to say. And I get things out of all of it. And at the end of the day, I love having my neighbors in my little area that it's kind of an easy, ready-made way for us to kind of be with each other. I don't know. I had a moment in a Relief Society lesson. It was a couple years ago where I was sitting at the very back. And I'm admitting a lot about my own judgmentalism. I have a lot of it in me. I sat there at the back, and it was a particular teacher that I'm like, oh, I don't want to sit through this lesson with this teacher, right? This teacher has nothing for me, right? And at one point, she just asked a simple question. She said, "What has it done for your life to be in connection with other women of faith?" And it stopped me in my tracks. And I remember looking around the room, and I was looking, it was at the very back, so I could see everybody, but it was, the back of their head for a lot of them. But it was a ward I'd been in for a long, long time. And I looked around, and I just paused with every single woman in that room. And I remembered just really good things that have happened with each of those women. And I thought about all of the qualities that they had that I admired. And I just got so overwhelmed with, and I was just teary, just thinking of how much goodness was in the room, and how lucky I was and to be able to be in a place where they were a deeper part of my life. It wasn't just people that I saw on Sunday. I was deeply in these women's lives, many of them. And I just thought, this whole room, one of the things that I think most people in this room have in common is that they're here because they just want to be better, whatever that is for them. And that was inspiring to me in that moment. I was just kind of overwhelmed with, like, not everybody has that. Not everybody has the opportunity to just be in a place where people just want to be better, and whatever their faults, they want to love. They hold those things dear. We're super messy with it. When all the belief stuff gets, like, thrown in there, it starts to draw lines and everything. But at its heart, this is the church. It's the people. And so people can look at me, and people do. And it's usually the Orthodox Mormon and the Orthodox post-Mormon who look at me and say, you're not Mormon. You're not Mormon. But I just look at them and say, who gets to define that? I get to define that. This is where I want to come and worship. And this is where I want to be with other people, and I want to serve with these people. And I want to make things better where I can. And I want to make myself better. And I have to admit, as much as I hate it, there are things that I still have to learn from them. There are still things I have to learn from them. My journey is not done there. It may be someday. I'm totally open to who knows where this is going to be. I mean, every year of my faith journey, I've kind of looked out and go, I've got this new way of looking things. I've arrived, And after you do that 7 times, you start going, I have no idea. If we had done this interview a year ago, it would have been a different interview. If we do an interview like this in a year, it's going to be different. And I know this about myself. But for today, this is what is making sense for me. And for right now, I don't feel like I've been called out of Mormonism yet. That's just not been my call. This is where I need to be. And in my comment about Salt Lake, there are a lot of really wonderful congregations here. And there are certain pockets that tend to draw people who are seeking for Mormonism because they have a lot of those second half of life things that are really beautiful. And I noticed that the LDS Church casts a long shadow in these places. And what I mean by that is a lot of them are spending time trying to show how not us they are, to a point that I don't know who they are. So the congregations I tend to be drawn to are ones who kind of just know who they are, and they're willing to play in the field with Mormonism, but it's not so large in their consciousness.
Two of the hardest questions that I ask people, and that are sometimes viewed as the most offensive are, number one, isn't it just a sign of privilege that you can do this? In other words, you're not queer as far as we know. You're not trans as far as we know. You're white. You're not a person of color. You're privileged. You're educated, upper middle class, socioeconomically. Like, of course you can have the privilege of being able to stay in the church and enjoy it, but that's privilege. And there are all sorts of these marginalized people that Jesus would have, the poor, queer people, people of color, the marginalized, people that aren't Christian, whatever, that don't have the luxury because the church is inhospitable to them or not comfortable for them, or the church makes them their enemy indirectly or indirectly. So how nice it is for you that you have the privilege of being able to enjoy the country club of Mormonism while you know that it's excluding and hurting all sorts of other people?
I would say you're right. You're right. It's all of those things. I have privilege, and it's why I can do it. And I don't think everyone should. And
but if somebody says, well, how can you live with yourself knowing that? How can you live with yourself and be a part of it?
Yeah. So it's complicated. It is. And there are days when I ask myself the same question: how can I live with this? Because I do see the damage done. What I would say is my greatest hope is that we could make the church a place that deserves those people. Because right now they don't deserve the LGBT people. They don't deserve the people that they are seeing as threatening. And I want the church to be a place that deserves them. It's really hard. It's hard for me. The only thing I can say is I hope to be a presence of someone who is willing to stand up for what is right when it comes to the inclusion and love of these people, to encouraging people to take in the reality of their lives and their stories. And I hope that I can be the presence of someone who can be a safe harbor for a younger person or someone who is coming up in this and doesn't have the choice, but maybe if I can be someone who can make space for them where maybe some other people can't. And truly, I'm finding more and more people are willing to make space for people like that on the ground, regardless of what Dallin Oaks is saying in conference. I see really good people who are just saying, you know what, that doesn't quite feel right to me. And I don't know how to figure it all out. And I'm going to love the LGBT people in my life. Because ultimately, that's who the church is. The church isn't owned by any one particular apostle or president of the church. The church is all of us. And so that kind of goes back to people tell me I'm not really Mormon. I just reject that. I'm Mormon and I'm part of the church, and there are growing numbers of people like me. And that's what Mormonism is. Mormonism is the people. Mormonism is the church. But I wrestle with it. I'm not going to give a pat answer. I don't think that I'm better for staying. I don't think that I don't want to absolve myself of the complicity of being part of a church that is not good to everybody.
What do you mean complicity?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes I feel that. I've heard that term come from a lot of people out of the church. I've heard you say that before, that we're complicit. We're complicit in the harm.
If you pay tithing or give your reputation or time.
Yep. And I think about those things very deeply. I take them seriously. And in my personal life, I try to minimize that complicity in every way I possibly can.
What do you mean? How?
So I direct my tithing dollars elsewhere.
So in your mind, you're paying tithing, but you're doing it to causes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I pay my tithing to places that I think are helping those kinds of causes.
Where the church might be doing some harm.
Yes. That's one way I do it. The other way I do it is just speaking up for people where I can. If something harmful...
Don't you do Firesides sometimes?
I do. I have, yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah. So I've done a couple of Firesides. I've also been a guest lecturer at BYU in a class. In those settings, I'm just really trying to open the hearts of people to what the realities of faith crisis are, to help people understand that people are not deceived, people are not evil, people have not just given into the influence of Satan or been led astray by anti-Mormon literature or wanting to sin or all of the tropes that we tell about people. I want to open people's minds to the complexity of what people are going through, that this is normal, this is developmental, and we need to make room for them, and we need to be better to each other as we go through this, because relationships are really important to me. I work with a lot of relationships, a lot of families, a lot of mixed faith marriages, because this is the last thing that should cause rifts between people. And it's one of the biggest things that does in our culture. And so a big part of what I'm talking about is just ways to walk through it, to minister to one another. And I'm not just saying the people in the church to minister to the people who are in faith crisis or leaving. Like, I want those people to minister to their families as well. We all have that responsibility to one another, to be good to one another. And I want to help people learn how to do that. So that's a lot of what I do. And then I also kind of offer little nuggets that I think can help us open up to the second half of life that actually is there in Mormonism, because that was the second half of what Richard Rohr said, right? You have almost no second half of life. I think if you're an outsider just looking at correlated Mormonism, he's right. I do think there's second half of life that exists there. And I just want to kind of encourage that. I want to encourage a deeper faith. I want people to not be afraid of doubt. That's kind of why I said that in our first segment of, I feel like my goal is to bring faith to the faithless and doubt to the faithful. I find that it's a deeper, richer experience. And so that's kind of what those firesides are about when I do those.
That reminds me of Dan. That seems to be Dan Witherspoon's mantra is to deeper, richer, big Mormonism, you have to say. Big Mormonism, right? Not small Mormonism. Yeah,
Dan and I have a lot in common in the way that we view some of those things. We have a lot of overlap.
So if listeners will bear with me, we're going to kind of wrap up, but I'm going to, in my mind, as you were talking about privilege, I came up with this metaphor that was Mormonism's a country club, and there are, let's just say, servants that are mowing the lawn and cooking the food, and they're not allowed, and people that are excluded from being members. And then it's the people in the church that are like the members of the country club that are enjoying the nice meals and enjoying the benefits of the club and golfing, while there are others who are either suffering or fully excluded. So that was the frame that I had in my mind as a metaphor to then set you up and say, well, how can you just enjoy the benefits of the country club at the expense of all the people that are either harmed or excluded? And then in my mind, and I'm doing this as I'm listening to you, and then in my mind, I'm thinking, no, that metaphor breaks down.
Yeah,
and
it does.
There's a couple reasons why. Well, go ahead. I want to hear you fill it in. I can fill it in.
Yeah, I see it break down. I mean, I feel like while there's truth to the privilege thing, right? There's truth to that.
But it breaks down.
But it breaks down. It breaks down because I don't think those are the ideals of the church. I don't. I think that the people in the church are not wanting to try to set themselves up in that kind of a place. I think
no, that's true. But can I just say,
sure,
it breaks down.
Ahead.
Let me tell you why I think it breaks down. And I know this is your interview, but I like to participate in these conversations too, a little bit. It breaks down because number one, if we really want to go with that metaphor, there are members of the country club that are dying or that are sick, right? Yeah. That's one.
Okay. Yeah.
And so by you staying in, number one, it's not, you probably wouldn't say you're one of the healthy ones. You're probably sick too.
I'm more on the margins for sure.
And you're saying you're staying in to help those who are sick or dying, who are in the country club sick or dying, as well as those who are, it's just all of it. It's all the messiness in it.
Yep.
And you want to be a part, you're willing to be a part of that messiness, not just to get direct benefit, but also to provide help, but also to learn, and also just because that's where you are. But then outside of the country club, there aren't just servants and people that are excluded. There's all these people living these wonderful lives.
Absolutely.
And you're choosing not to go necessarily be a part of that, but to stay in it. And so it's messy and beautiful outside, and it's messy and beautiful inside.
Yes.
And you just, for now,
yeah,
are deciding to stay with the messiness inside.
Absolutely. It is. It's a mess out there. It's a mess everywhere.
Yeah.
Like humanity is just freaking messy, you know? And I hear this from people who've been out of the church for a long time too. I'll always ask, what do you miss the most? You know, do you feel something missing? And, you know, and this is not to take anything away. Like, they're very happy and fulfilled. I do not think you need the church to have that. And a lot of them are just like, yeah, I kind of miss that community. There are elements of what we're all trying to do there that are hard to replace. They're hard to replace. We do things really, really well in so many ways. And
community.
Yeah.
It may be an imperfect community.
Yeah, it for sure is.
But it is a community.
It is a community.
It's a long-standing community that clearly means a lot to a lot of people, as fraught as it is.
Yep.
And it's hard to create long-standing, effective community outside of Mormonism once you leave it. I can testify that it's hard. It's hard.
And as fraught as it is, and as backward as it can seem, and as harmful as it can be, I've noted that it continues to go very painfully slowly in the right direction. Very painfully slowly. And this is also something in life, right? Like, our society is doing this. We're going very painfully and slowly in the right direction. And it's hard. It's hard when you have the heart of an activist. It's hard when you have the heart to want to include everybody, when you want to have equal opportunity for everybody in this country, when you want to move toward a place where there's more opportunity for everybody. And it's really hard to be able to stand the idea that we're not getting there fast enough. And we want to vilify the people who are standing in the way of that, right? And at some point, we have to learn to sit in the tragic gap of where we are versus the ideal of where we want things to be. That's part of being human too, is being able to stand that and do what we can to nudge it up, but we're not going to get there. Martin Luther King didn't get us there, right? Amazing people don't get us there. Whatever efforts we have, it's not going to get us there. I'm not going to see the church get to where I want it to be in my lifetime. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. This country is not going to be where I want it to be in my lifetime. So it's part of being human. We've just got to, and that's the discernment I think each person has to go through. Do I bloom where I'm planted? Do I go out to other pastures and see what else is there? Because I guarantee there is work in the vineyard everywhere you go, whether it's in the church or outside of the church. There are ample opportunities to do good things and to move the work forward. And the more we can sink into the discomfort of it all, the more able we will be to create the body of Christ and Zion. That's one thing I love about Joseph Smith. I love his vision of Zion. And I love that idea of having every person bring exactly who they are and have that be okay. To me, that Zion, that is the body of Christ. That's what I want to be part of. I'm never going to get there in this church, but I can do my part for now, and I can go hang out with my friends in other places, and I can enjoy being with them in those places as well and build Zion wherever I am.
I mean, you can move in that direction. You may not ever get there, but you can kind of move in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can do what I want. So that's the thing. Like, I think that is the discernment of each human being. At what point is this where I stay and do this, or at what point do I head out to other pastors and see what else is out there? And I think people really need to listen deeply to themselves and figure out what is right for them.
So I know that I'm going to end on this because we both have to go. It's time. And then we'll hopefully have you back many times. So granted that you're not proselytizing this view or holding it up as the true way or as a great way or anything. You're just saying this is where you are.
Yes.
Granted that.
Yep.
I do want you to make a case, and this is the case I want you to make, which is I want you to explain what you've received from staying in and how it's aided you in healing and growth, how it's been positive for you and talk as long as you want about this.
Okay.
How has it been beneficial or positive for you to decide to do for now, second half of life
here
within the LDS Church?
So this is a little complicated for me. And again, it depends on the day. Again, I'm a personality that tends to see all the problems. Like if someone it would be easier for me, John, to sit here and tell you all the problems with it than it would be for me to sit and tell you all the good things I've gotten from it, even though I know they're there. That's still where I am in my journey. And that's kind of my personality anyway, because I am the person, if you've got something broken, bring me in, because I will tell you exactly why it's wrong and how you should fix it. That's my skill. I'm a fixer. This is what I would say is kind of backing up to a 10,000-foot view of what religion is, of what the story of humanity is, of what beautiful truths and good things have come through every society that's ever populated the planet, and many of them independently of one another. Taking that view and getting that outside view of the church was 100% necessary for me to be able to do any of this. If I had never had a faith crash, if I had never stepped outside to learn anything else, I do not think I would be in a good place. I think that I would be really still beating myself up, whether I was active in church or not. I think that people need to be able to take that journey outside. It's taken me a long time to kind of look back and see the gifts that Mormonism has given me. I think that it, in many ways, brought me the profession that I'm doing now, obviously, but also my ability, without having the opportunity to be a teacher, to give talks, to get up in front of people, to be able to present my ideas, I don't know if I would be able to present at workshops and do firesides and present places and articulate my thoughts. Like, it's brought me a lot of good things that way. It's brought me a lot of good, real, literal, or metaphorical, take your pick, stories and scriptures and ideas and things to hold on to help me learn what is good and what is not good in this life. One of the things I so often tell my clients, I love working with the clients I work with. I love it. And one of the reasons I love it is that regardless of where they are in belief, wherever they are in and out of the church, wherever they are, the majority of them have been heavily influenced by Mormonism in some way. And they are really good people. I just think the vast majority, maybe all of the clients I have worked with, are amazingly good people. I think that's a testament to our first half of life and how well we've done it. So there's something there. There's something inspirational. There's something magical. There's something, whether eternal progression is an actuality or not, I love the idea. That's inspirational to me. I love the idea of constantly trying to get better. I love all of the basic teachings. And I get really, really, really cringy when we do our Orthodox Utah Mormon thing. I cringe a lot at church. I cringe a lot. And there are just times when I'm like just really super inspired by the goodness that's coming through from people. So I don't know. It's home. It's home to me. And depending on the day, I mean, I had a whole week it's probably every other month I have a week where I'm like, I'm done. I'm out. This is it. This is it. This is not for me. I can't do this. There are too many problems. My work is crap. Everything I'm doing, all of my efforts, it's all crap. I'm just like going to sell it all and move to the south of France. I don't know. But I don't know. There's something that just keeps calling me back here for now. I don't know what else to say. Talk to me next year. I may be in a different place. I don't know.
I normally don't do this, but I'm going to answer my own question at the end of your episode, which is super rude, but you can fast forward. In addition to the beautiful things you said, I try and teach a little Richard Rohr in the retreats I do. And it doesn't matter what tradition you're raised in, even if you're raised atheist or agnostic, you still have a faith crisis against whatever you were raised with. It literally doesn't matter.
100%.
And so this thing that we think is the Mormon journey of believing Orthodox and then losing your faith and then being disillusioned and then trying to figure out what to do with the rest of your life, it's the universal experience. It's Pleasantville, it's the Truman Show, it's The Village, it's The Invention of Lying, it's Tangled, it's Wicked. It's like every movie and every Broadway musical ever created since the dawn of time. It's the Mormon temple ceremony. It's Adam and Eve cast out of the Garden of Eden, trying to build a life in the lone and dreary world. It's every one of those things. It's so universal. And so a church, whatever gets you to second half of life, you there's an argument to be said, you got to be grateful for what got you there. And Mormonism got us where we are. And now as I loop it back to you, I think about that Jana that's insecure, that Jana that's giving her life to somebody else, or that Jana that feels inadequate all the time, or on that treadmill. If you had been raised Catholic or Presbyterian or Lutheran or Muslim, it wouldn't have mattered. You would have been that Jana on that wheel most likely.
100%.
And what is I'm like celebrating your story. I'm like, look at Jana now. She's more comfortable in her own skin. She's more confident. She feels better about the life she's living. She's able to now pay it forward and try and help save marriages or help other people through the journey. She's speaking with wisdom and power and integrity and grace and goodness. And guess what? It was Mormonism that got her there. It was
100%.
And so that's the answer is what you have to, you will never get well in second half of life if you don't make peace and even have gratitude for the good parts of the first half of life that got you there.
Absolutely. And you have to be ready to do that.
Give yourself
right.
And
give
if you're
yourself
abused or trauma. It's going to be harder.
Give yourself grace to mourn that first half of life and all the crap it did to you too. Right. Yeah. It's the wisdom pattern that Richard Rohr teaches is order, disorder, reorder. Right. And you have to go through the disorder, and you can't wish yourself out of it. A lot of us want to. We want to go straight from order to reorder and skip all of that disorder. It's a necessary part of the journey. It's a really painful part of the journey, but the only way you get to reorder is by doing disorder really, really well. So it's one of those things, you've got to let yourself feel the anger. You've got to let yourself be really mad at all the harm. You have to let yourself do all of that, because what is at the core of that is something really wise inside of you that knows you deserve better. I knew, my soul knew I deserved better than the conditional God of my imagination. It knew I have to let go of that. I'm still on the journey of rebuilding what that is, but I had to let go of that. I had to deconstruct it. I have to say that is not okay. It's not okay for my soul. So that's painful. It's awful. A lot of people wish I could just figure it out and know where I'm at. And I don't know that I'll ever get there, but I'm on the journey and I'm going to continue on my path.
Yeah. And as much as people wouldn't expect me or others like me to say this, like, I'm grateful for the church and its role in my life. Yeah. And I don't want to be rude, but I really am happy with myself now. I learned from Carolyn Pearson, of all people, to be confident that it's okay to say, I'm all right, I'm good, I do good things. And I now am happy with who I am. I'm happy in my marriage. Yeah. I'm doing my best as a dad, doing my best as a spouse. I'm helping the world. And guess what? Mormonism helped make me. It wasn't the only thing, but it helped. And so I'm grateful for that. And I'm appreciative, and I even like it and respect it. Amen. And I see good in it. And it was that first half of life that now lets me be in the second half of life, that I'm really happy with second half of life. Oh. And I see that in you. Yeah,
I'm getting there. I'm far more appreciative of the church than I used to be, right? I'm getting there. And the more I stick around in it, the more I see that is good. But it takes working through that hurt. Yeah. It takes giving room for it. And then when you're ready, it'll start to come online. And that's what reorder feels like. I feel like I've got a foot in disorder and I've got a foot in reorder, and I'm kind of teetering, and it just depends on the day, right? Yeah. But it's important. I think it is important to make peace at some point with that, when you're able, when you're ready, when you've done the hard work, because you don't want to stay in the rut of hating it forever. That's not good. That's not good for the soul, or to move on. So I always tell people, while you're doing the disorder, while it's really ugly, also make sure that you're paying attention to what inspires you. Make sure you're paying attention to the things that enlarge you. Like, this is why Richard Rohr was so helpful to me, and the other teachers there. The other teachers are amazing. It's why I continue to listen to the Eckhart Tolles and the Thich Nhat Hanhs and everybody that I go where I'm inspired, because that's an important part of putting your trust back in yourself, your trust back in goodness, and knowing where you need to go next. So if you do both of those things and pay attention to both of those things, you're going to go right. You're going to be right where you need to be, and you're going to go right where you need to go. Yeah.
And some people may have other paths. I don't think we're holding this up as the path for everyone.
Absolutely
not.
And
the only other thing I'll say is, I lost my faith in 2001, so I've had 20, literally now, it's like my 20th anniversary of losing my faith. Yeah. For those of you who are just can't even see the possibility of making peace with the church, or even saying a good thing about it, go through your journey. Yep. You may not end up where I am. I'm not saying I'm better, but know that I've had a 20-year head start for over many of you, or 18 or 15 years. But I do. I look at the church with love and gratitude and frustration. And I love where I am now. And I sometimes miss the church, and I sometimes miss the community, and I sometimes wish I could go back. Yep. And I'm not ashamed to say that. Yep. And I'm really glad that I'm where I am, and who knows where I'll be tomorrow. And that's the last thing I was just going to say is, ultimately, the real answer is we're where we are. Like, we're just where we are. We went through that, and now we're here. And then we're going somewhere. And that sounds so dumb and kind of reductive and even simplistic. And and even worthless, but that is the reality.
It is.
It's like, we've been through what we've been through.
Yep.
We're where we are now, and we're going to figure out where we're going. And that's the truth.
It is. And you can't outrun yourself. Like wherever you go, there you are. Right. So whether I'm doing this inside Mormonism, whether I'm doing this outside of Mormonism, I mean, I'm not going to lie. COVID has been amazing in that one little way, right? It's been horrific in so many other ways, but it's been amazing in my ability to decompress from the constant, church thing. That's been good for my soul. It's been good for the soul of a lot of my clients. It's been a good thing for all
to go to church
religiously. Yes, it's been beautiful. I get to do my own church. I mean, the funny thing is, like, I'm the least Mormon person in my household. Well, maybe not. I'm one of the least Mormon people in my household. And I'm doing the most church out of any of them on any given Sunday. It's just not all Mormon. But no, yeah, you can't outrun yourself. So you can do this journey wherever, and there are going to be good and bad things about wherever you pick to do it. So pick your poison, pick the good and bad that you want to deal with at any given time, and just, hold the people that are close to you and love on everyone around you. That's my life advice.
I love it. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you, Jana. Yeah. Really quickly, if somebody wants to take advantage of your expertise, your services, briefly explain what it is you do and how people can access your services.
Yeah, sure. So I am a life coach. I specialize in all of these areas of faith journey, of relationship problems that crop up due to faith journey, mixed faith marriages, all of that. That's kind of my wheelhouse. Although I do have clients that come to me just needing like regular relation. They've left the church, they're done, and they just need relationship or career advice. I do that kind of coaching as well. My coaching training is broad, but this is just, this is my niche for sure and my expertise. So I work through Symmetry Solutions. You can find us at symmetrysols.com. And there's a number there that you can call. It'll go to our admin and you can ask to see me or one of our other wonderful, we have a group of great therapists and coaches who are all Mormon competent and also, just really open to people's journeys and just invested in helping people through this messiness because it is so messy, so hurtful, so it's exhausting to think. I mean, some days it takes me down, like there's so much pain. But I'm so happy to be doing what I'm doing. I'm passionate about it. And if anyone wants me to come speak to a group or whatever, I love that kind of stuff too. I've spoken to Relief Society groups and, whoever is interested, I'm always willing to talk about faith journey, about how that applies. And I do Firesides. I also spoke at Thrive, right? So I love just talking to people from the Mormon experience about whatever will help them. I don't care where you are. I gladly and happily work with John DeLynn, and I gladly and happily work with the BYU professor, right? So I just love to do all the things.
Well, thank you. I'm inspired and edified by being able to sit down with you. So I'm sure many of my listeners will be. So on behalf of myself and my listeners, thank you, Jana Spangler, for coming on Mormon Stories and for inspiring us and for all your growth and your work and your willingness to share it with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. You've inspired me over the years. So I just appreciate everything you've done as well.
All right. All right, everyone. Stay tuned for new episodes of Mormon Stories podcast. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com with feedback. If you don't support us, please consider becoming a monthly donor at mormonstories.org. Just whatever you can afford a month just really helps out. If you already support us, thank you. You can also give us a positive review wherever you can give us a review, share the word. We'll keep doing this type of content as long as people are willing to support it. And if you have ideas of other types of programs or interviewees, just please send your feedback to me. If you know someone that would be a great interview or a great topic, I want to hear it because we want to give you the content that you need. Soon we'll be starting up workshops and retreats again. I'm sure Dan and Natasha and Jana will as well. So this is the first time I've said that in over a year, but I'm looking forward to that. So stay tuned for events in the future. But be good to each other, be kind, love each other, stay tuned, and we'll see you guys all again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody. Thanks again, Jana.
Thank you.